Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. I'm Reuven Ben Shalom, sitting in this week for Jonathan Hessen. Earlier this month, a huge dam on the Dnipro River in the Kherson region occupied by Russian forces in southeastern Ukraine was blown up, flooding vast areas. Each side in the war predictably blamed the other, but the weight of motive and opportunity pointed to Russia, as it was in the process of hampering the imminent Ukrainian counteroffensive. While not unprecedented, such acts in war are rare in modern times. Are they effective, moral, legal? Could their perpetrators be tried as war criminals? And considering all the above, is the threat of going to such extremes credible as a deterrent against a comparable act, such as the use of weapons of mass destruction? This is an issue of universal implications, but it has a specific relevance to the Middle East, with its dams over the Nile, the Euphrates, and the Tigris, along with other rivers and waterways. Should policymakers and planners in the region be concerned lest someone, perhaps a terror group rather than a nation-state, try to emulate the Dnipro sabotage? Joining us today are Major General in Reserves Guy Tzur, formerly the Chief of the Infantry in the IDF and Chief of Planning in the General Staff, Brigadier General Reserve Doron Gavish, formerly Chief of Air Defense in the Israeli Air Force. Welcome, Doron.
Thank you.
And of course, our very own Amir Oren, Editor-at-Large. As is tradition, please get the ball rolling on this topic, Amir.
Thank you. Let me start with an anecdote. After Saddam Hussein occupied Kuwait and threatened to launch rockets, perhaps with chemical or biological warheads, into Israel, and no one knew whether he also had anything in the nuclear dimension, one of the top officers in the Israeli General Staff suggested that Israel blow up the Euphrates dams and flood much of Iraq, obviously also hurting civilians, not only the infrastructure and the Iraqi armed forces. Obviously, too, this idea was shelved immediately because it would have been considered a war crime. But a desperate nation with its back to the wall and threatening, perhaps in order to deter another nation, because a terror group is more difficult to deter, could very well use such a tactic and let the various institutions handling war crimes worry about it after the war, again, if this is existential. So, as you said in your introduction, the Aswan Dam was obviously a target, at least in deterrence parlance. The Renaissance Dam, now in dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt, could come up in conversation. If the nations sharing the Nile waters are not happy with the compromise. So yes, while we were all surprised to see whether it was the Russians or the Ukrainians blowing up this dam, it could happen again.
General Tzur, what's your perspective on this? Of course, we're sitting here in Israel looking at it with Israeli eyes, but viewing this as a military officer, and we always have our considerations, are targets legally, are they legal military targets? But how do you view this from afar, even though we don't know exactly who did what?
Well, I think that in the old world, and I will define it in a minute, in the old world, a nation acted according to their interests. And I think that it is not in the interest of any nation to make an extreme action that is not reversible, and it could be a war crime, and it will not end the war, it will just make it more extreme. So if I take it to our region, the thinking about terror action according to the nuclear umbrella of Iran can be something that is similar. And I think that everything that is too extreme also in war will not be profitable to the country that does it. But I think that we live in some kind of new times, new era, in which many leaders are against their nation. If we take Putin, we understand that the interests of the Russian nation wouldn't be to invade to Ukraine. I think that if we look on Trump and his dreams what to do with other countries and with Russia, I think that this phenomenon makes everything unacceptable, unexpected. So, I think that it's a very extreme times in which we can't expect what leaders that are demagogues, many of them, that are politicians that looks only on their interests and not on their nation interest. We can see it in Israel now. We can see in Israel a leader that acts against the interest of the nation and try to make it a dictator, dictatorship instead of democracy because of his guilt. So I think that we are in an era that is very much more dangerous than the old times when we knew that the nation acts according to their interests.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, the general took it multidimensionally.
Yeah.
Doron, how do you perceive this?
Well, I think that going back to the Ukraine situation, and I was looking at your opening remarks, and I also believe that probably it's not the Ukrainians, the ones that they did it. It really shows about the position that the Russians are at on this point. And we've talked about this war for many times during our shows. And I think this is really, what we could see here is that Russians, mainly Putin, they are in a situation that they are really with their back into the war.
Desperate.
And yeah, exactly. This is really someone who does like this, such an act, it looks like he is desperate. It looks like he's doing, he's one step before using a weapon of mass destruction. And you talk with, within Europe, there were a lot of discussion. Is he going to use it? Is it only a statement that there is nothing in the back of it? Well, I think that now we are closer to this point that it might happen. I'm sure that, by the way, if we would ask the people in Poland and in Finland, they would say it much before. We didn't really believe that this is something that could happen. So I'm very concerned. I think that really this act is more about getting close to using weapon of mass destruction. So this is the first thing. I think the other thing, and again, you touched it on your opening remark, is are we going to see organizations, terror organizations, state or other actors that are imitating it? They see it as something which is legitimate to do. So I think on this there is a big role to the international community, to the United States, of course, but also to the international community. How do they behave through this act? Because I think this should be a strong reaction to it in all means, starting with the legal means and any other means. But this is something that we cannot just look at it. We have to be very proactive in reacting on it.
Mm-hmm. I want to take one thing that Doron says about the mass destruction possibility. We could expect, I think that Putin didn't expect to get what he got in this war. He was certain, I think, that his military forces will prevail in a few weeks maybe with not many damages, and they will be a hero. And I think that he saw something that he didn't believe that he see. What we could expect is that he will not do another extreme step because he learned something. What is so concerned is that he didn't learn anything. And he did the invasion, and it was a mistake, and it was an extreme act. Now we did the Dnipro dam, and also it's not something that it will prevail. I'm sure that Ukraine, in the end of the day, will prevail in this war. So we understand that he doesn't learn from what he does and from the results of what he does.
I see.
That's more concern about the mass destruction weapon.
Amir, all this assumes that, of course, that this is a very extreme measure. Is it legal? Could it be that some planners sat and made a calculation that this is a legitimate military target in any capacity?
So the operative term which we all used here is invasion. And we almost got used to fire being more important than maneuver, standoff, air forces, or perhaps naval air forces from aircraft carriers. And here we go back to World War I, or even the American Civil War, with a ground invasion. Now, if someone invades your territory, you may be justified in destroying your own infrastructure in order to stop the invasion, which is what the Russians did 200 years ago with the scorched earth. In order for Napoleon, or later Hitler, to have a logistic problem, and General Grant or General Sherman too, in the U.S. Civil War, if you burn everyone's grain storage or wheat, then the population starves and the leadership must surrender. This was the old thinking. So first of all, if you do it to yourself, it's probably legal. You may have a domestic problem if the population then rises against you. But the enemy cannot proclaim that this is illegal, and this would not be a war crime. And we have seen, for instance, bridges being blown up, let's say the bridges on the Rhine, before the US Army or the British and Canadian forces tried to cross into Germany in 1945. The Germans were justified in destroying their own bridges. If you do it to the other side, this is probably a crime. If you are going to flood another country's countryside, this must be considered a crime.
But, for Putin, it won't be a crime because for his point of view, Ukraine is part of the Russia. So if we're going to this logic, so both sides could say that it's not a crime.
And we have to remember that this is happening while the Russians are occupying this exact place. Also, if I'm not mistaken, the Soviets bombed a dam on the same river in the Second World War, again, out of their own calculations of holding that place, preventing the Germans from coming
That's
in.
true.
There's a specific question I would want to hear from you. It's strange for me that in 2023, with all technology, satellites, intelligence, we don't know what happened. We don't know who did it. And that's interesting for me also as in our region, in Israel, doing things. Is it still possible to do something of this extent, so big, so massive, and say, I didn't do it?
In fact, yes, you see.
Maybe the Americans know and they're not telling us yet. But again, our region, our capabilities, what do you think?
Well, I think that, first of all, the capabilities, the intelligence capabilities of the Russians and of the Ukraine are very low. You can't compare their capabilities to the Israeli capabilities. I think that if it would happen in the Middle East, probably such an act, such a huge act, something like this, we would know for sure.
Remember the Balev line? We thought we knew, we didn't.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I think that the American has all the capabilities to see and to make a review, back review, and to reveal. I don't know if they want to tell us who did it, but I think that it's not the issue. I think that it is no questionable that Putin is a war crime, is a war criminal. I think that most of the world is in the side of Zelensky. Even part of the world don't say it and don't support it actively, like Israel, unfortunately. But still, I think that we know who is the bad and who is the good in this war. So if this action, I don't believe, but if it was made by the Ukraine, it's no one's interest to reveal it.
Reuven, let me make a remark and then invade your territory and ask Doron something. The remark has to do with the fact that we all assume a chain of command. A very rigid command and control, with Putin giving the orders and someone in the Kherson region executing. But we have seen, for instance, with the Wagner Group, that there are several forces at play. And maybe it was a local initiative by someone, perhaps junior, took action without Moscow knowing about it beforehand, and therefore American intelligence didn't pick it up. Just a remark. Now, Doron, as an air defense chief, if you were tasked with protecting such a target, and we know that there are infrastructure or strategic targets, power stations. There's a rumor that not too far from Dimona, Israel has a very valuable target to defend. Is it possible to do it, at least from the air? If it's a sabotage, if there are saboteurs sneaking in, it's another problem altogether. How do you approach it?
First of all, if it would be from the air, probably, and we've talked before about the intelligence part of it, and could we know who did it and so on, probably if it would be from the air, it would be much easier. Because really, to come from the air without any footprint is very hard, and probably it's almost not doable. So I think that this is really something that, and again, I'm referring to the previous question. It's a matter of time. We will know. I think that this is something that the UK intelligence, the American intelligence, other countries, even within Ukraine, I think that at the end of the day, we will know who did it, and it would come out. This is my estimation. I find it hard.
Or they already know.
Oh, maybe someone already know. I find it really hard to believe that it would go like this, but your estimation, this is something also that could be. So we don't know for sure. Now, for the defending such an asset, this is, of course, very important asset and strategic asset. So there are the means to defend those assets. Every military, this is something that he does, and I'm a bit surprised, by the way, that there were not any forces, Ukraine forces, in this aspect, or others that were taking this site as a strategic one and one that is needed to be defended, because this is what you do. You look on all your strategic assets, and then you say, okay, how do I defended them? So the question is, yes, this is something which is doable. There is no 100%, never in this world, but for sure it is doable. But it is not very complicated, although it sounds strategic asset. It is not so complicated from an air defense point of view to defend such an asset.
But if this is the case, each military has its own doctrine. The Americans with their electronic warfare, others may send commando forces to disable. If this is protected, maybe there will be preemption. The first target would be the air defense, and only then they will get to the asset itself.
It could be also, but if someone is doing it, he would have to do it with very high volume of the fight. Let's put it this way. So if he wants to do it without really someone knows that he is doing it, so I'm not sure that he would go and start a fight again. This is too much in order to do something without willing to have a footprint that you did it. So I don't see it really happening in this case.
Yet I agree with Doron, but yet we have to remember that this is 6 months already a war, and when you are in 6 months war like the Ukraine that 16 months.
Time flies.
Yeah. Wow,
February of
16 months.
Yes.
You don't have enough
Assets.
to guard everything that you want. And you have to choose.
The blanket is short, you're right.
The blanket is very short, and to think that Putin will do it, and I think that it is Putin, and it is an order from above, and I think that it will be exposed in the near future. But to think that he will do it is very extreme thinking, and maybe that's why they didn't put all the assets that they needed to take care on.
But General Tzur, you're an armor officer, and obviously the idea, if the Russians did it, we think that they probably did, likely or not. But let's just assume that it's the Russians, and that the motive was to try and to stop or at least slow down the counteroffensive.
Yeah.
How effective is such a flooding when tanks and APCs and infantry and artillery move forward? Is it that effective against the maneuvering force?
I think that it's very effective. I think, also when you do it, you have to understand why you do it and what you try to achieve in this doing. If you want to postpone the counterattack, it can be very, very efficient. If you want to change their goals, I think that it is not effective, because they will do the counterattack. They will attack because the Ukrainian, and I think that Zelensky understand it. At least what I understand, what I assume is that the Ukrainian and Zelensky know that this war will end only when they will prevail in it. This nuts Putin will not end it until he will achieve his dreams, and he will not achieve it. So I think that Zelensky understand it, and he will make the counterattack. So, and he will continue.
But is the terrain impassable, or does that mean that you have to bypass it by airborne forces, by some...
Or to bypass, or to wait. It's two options.
It dries up.
Yeah.
But also, in a way, could there be such scenarios in the Middle East? Something that we may face as far...
I try to think about it. In the Middle East, you can take the Euphrates and the Tigris, and say a war around Turkey or something like this can be something similar. But in our region, I don't see something that is so effective and has immense influence on its big region. I don't.
Maybe Aswan then. This is something
Aswan. But this is not your enemy now.
No, for sure.
Maybe Doron, as the Air Force rep here, coming to do an operation in this magnitude, could you walk us through what we would do as far as assessing the legality and the moral aspects of a major operation?
Yeah. Well, I think this is one of the main, I would say, means that once we are looking on a fight, on a target, on an attack, this is one of those main things that we are looking at. We are looking at what are the applications of what we are doing. Legal application, moral application. This is something in our agenda all the time. By the way, we see it in the Gaza Strip when the Israeli Air Force the IDF overall. But when we are attacking targets, this is one of the main things that we are looking at to make sure that what we are doing is legal, is moral. So we fight with those values. So for sure, this is something that is being taken in consideration, and I'm sure that in Israel, if something like this would be considered, this would be one of the main issues on the table. And by the way, and Guy mentioned it before, when such a strategic target is being attacked, this is something that doesn't stay in the military. This is something that a very high-level decision maker have to look at it, have to decide it, have to approve it, and probably the head of the state.
So the scenario that Amir was talking about certainly would never happen here. The prime minister himself would have to...
I don't see it. I really don't see it happening. Israel is, and the IDF overall, is a very moral country. I don't see us doing something.
But there was a Jewish underground planning to blow up Temple Mount.
Yeah. Again, taking it multi-dimensional.
But again,
no, he said it can't
no,
happen here.
No, it's not what I was saying. I was saying from a state level.
Yes.
If there would be a terror organization, even Jewish terror organization, this is something that could happen.
We're nearing the end of our time, but really, in short, General, do you think that once something like this happens, it's a precedent that now that it happened, in a way, others could say, if they do it, I could do it? Really, in short.
I think that countries that fight with values and moral habits will not do it. And countries that don't will do it. And I think that it depends. It's what I said about the new times. When we have leaders that act against their nation interests and they are, look only on their interests, it can happen. So if you ask me which country it can happen, in the countries that leaders are narcissists and demagogues.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our guests, General Tzul,
Thank you.
General Gavish, 4-star General Amir Oren.
At least 40-star.
I'd like to thank our viewers for being with us today. See you next time. Shalom from Jerusalem.